Hey, listening squirrels, I don't look like a booger again. Hey, and you're not feeling that great? Actually, I feel decent. Yay. I am having some harking attacks, but I go to the doctor today at 1:30. Yay! I love to go to the doc, but I love to get well. Okay, let's get back to whatever chapter we're on. You'll see it. I think it's just 2. We feel rather awful being in her house, said Joanna. No, my dear young lady, you mustn't feel that way. Her dear good Florence is devoted to her, and she told me herself how happy she was to have such nice tenants. Here Mr. Pye made a little bow. She told me she thought she had been most fortunate. The house, I said, has a very soothing atmosphere. Mr. Pye darted a quick glance at me. Really? You feel that? Now that's very interesting. I wondered, Yes, I wondered. What do you mean, Mr. Pye? Asked Joanna. Mr. Pye spread out his plump hands. Nothing. One wondered, that is all. I do believe in atmosphere, people's thoughts and feelings. They give their impression to the walls and the furniture. I did not speak for a moment or two. I was looking round me and wondering how I would describe the atmosphere of Prior's Lodge. It seemed to me that the curious thing was that it hadn't any atmosphere. That was really very remarkable. I have swallowing issues. I reflected on this point so long that I heard nothing of the conversation going on between Joanna and her host. I was recalled to myself, however, by hearing Joanna uttering farewell preliminaries. I came out of my dream and added my quota. We all went out into the hall. As we came towards the front door, a letter came through the box and fell on the mat. Afternoon post, murmured Mr. Pye as he picked it up. Now, my dear young lady, you will come. Now, my dear young people, you will come again, won't you? Such a pleasure to meet some broader minds, if you understand me. Someone with an appreciation of art. Really, these dear good people down here. If you mention the ballet it conveys to them, pirouetting toes and tulle skirts and old gentlemen with opera glasses and the naughty 90s. It does indeed. 50 years behind the times, that's what I put them down as. A wonderful country, England. It has pockets. Limstock is one of them. Interesting from a collector's point of view. I always feel I have voluntarily put myself under a glass shade when I'm here. The peaceful backwater where nothing ever happens. Shaking hands with us twice over, he helped me with exaggerated care into the car. Joanna took the wheel. She negotiated with some care the circular sweep round a plot of unblemished grass. Then, with a straight drive ahead, she raised a hand to wave goodbye to our host where he stood on the steps of the house. I leaned forward to do the same, but our gesture of farewell went unheeded. Mr. Pye had opened his mail. He got one of those letters. He was standing, staring down at the open sheet in his hand. Joanna had described him once as a plump pink cherub. He was still plump, but he was not looking like a cherub now. His face was a dark, congested purple, contorted with rage and surprise. And at that moment I realized there had been something familiar about the look of that envelope. I had not realized it at the time. Indeed, it had been one of those things that you note unconsciously without knowing that you do note them. "Goodness," said Joanna, "what's bitten the poor pet?" "I rather fancy," I said, "that it's the hidden hand again." She turned an astonished face towards me and the car swerved. "Careful, wench," I said. Joanna refixed her attention on the road. She was frowning. "You mean a letter like the one you got?" "That's my guess." What is this place?" asked Joanna. "It looks the most innocent, sleepy, harmless little bit of England you can imagine." "We're, to quote Mr. Pye, nothing ever happens," I cut in. "He chose the wrong minute to say that." "Something has happened." "But who writes these things, Jerry?" I shrugged my shoulders. "My dear girl, how should I know? Some local nitwit with a screw loose, I suppose." "But why? It seems so ignorant." "Idiotic. You must read Freud and Jung and that lot to find out, or ask our Dr. Owen." Joanna tossed her head. "Dr. Owen doesn't like me." "He's hardly seen you." "He's seen quite enough, apparently, to make him cross over if he sees me coming along the high street." "A most unusual reaction," I said sympathetically, "and one you're not afraid to use." Joanna was frowning again. "No, but seriously, Jerry, why do people write anonymous letters?" "As I say, they got a screw loose. It satisfies some urge, I suppose. If you've been smitten or ignored or frustrated and your life's pretty dull and drab, I suppose you get a sense of power. From sense of power. Shoot. From stabbing in the dark at people who are happy and enjoying themselves." Joanna shivered. "Not nice. No, not nice. I should imagine the people in these country places tend to be inbred, and so you would get a fair amount of queers. Somebody, I suppose, quite uneducated and inarticulate, with better education." Joanna did not finish her sentence, and I said nothing. I've never been able to accept the easy belief that education is a panacea for every ill. As we drove through the town before climbing up the hill road, I looked curiously at the new figures abroad in the high street. Was one of those sturdy countrywomen going about with a load of spite and malice behind her placid brow, planning perhaps even now a further outpouring of vindictive spleen? But I still did not take the thing seriously. And this is part 2. Oh, this is chapter 3, which you know from seeing the title. But I, at this point in time, have not written it. So, chapter 3, part 2. 2 days later, we went to a bridge party at the Symingtons. It was a Saturday afternoon. The Symingtons always had their bridge parties on a Saturday because the office was shut then. There were 2 tables. The players were the Symingtons, ourselves, Miss Griffith, Mr. Pye, Miss Barton, and a Colonel Appleton, whom we had not yet met, and who lived in Comacre, a village some 7 miles distant. He was a perfect specimen of the blimp type, about 60 years of age. Liked playing what he called a plucky game, which usually resulted in immense sums above the line being scored by his opponents, and was so frustrated. Lucky game. Score based on, and was so intrigued by Joanna that he practically never took his eyes off her the whole afternoon. I was forced to admit that my sister was probably the most attractive thing that had been seen in Limstock for many a day. For many a long day. When we arrived, Elsie Holland, the children's governess, was hunting for some extra bridge scorers and an ornate writing desk. She glided across the floor with them in the same celestial way I had first noticed, but the spell could not be cast a second time. Exasperating that it should be so, a waste of a perfectly lovely form and face, but I noticed now only too clearly the unexceptionally large white teeth like tombstones, and the way she showed her gums when she laughed. She was, unfortunately, one of your prattling girls. Are these the ones, Mrs. Symington? It's ever so stupid of me not to remember where we put them away last time. It's my fault, too, I'm afraid. I had them in my hand, and then Brian called his engine and had got caught, and I ran out. Excuse me. I ran out, and what with one thing and another, I must have just stuffed them in somewhere stupid. These aren't the right ones. I see now they're a bit yellow at the edges. Shall I tell Agnes, tea at 5? I'm taking the kiddies to Longbarrow so there won't be any noise. A nice, kind, bright girl. I caught Joanna's eye. She was laughing. I stared at her coldly. Joanna always knows what is passing in my mind, curse her. We settled down to the bridge. I was soon to know to a nicety the bridge status of everyone in Limstock. Mrs. Symington was an exceedingly good bridge player and was quite a devotee of the game. Like many definitely unintellectual women, she was not stupid and had a considerable natural shrewdness. Her husband was a good sound player, slightly overcautious. Mr. Pye can best be described as brilliant. He had an uncanny flair for psychic bidding. Joanna and I, since the party was in our honor, played at the table with Mrs. Symington and Mr. Pye. It was Symington's task to pour oil on troubled waters and by the exercise of tact to reconcile the 3 other players at this table. Colonel Appleton, as I have said, was wont to play a plucky game. Little Miss Barton was without exception the worst bridge player I have ever come across, and always enjoyed herself enormously. She did manage to follow suit, but had the wildest ideas as to the strength of her hand. Never knew the score. Never knew the score. Repeatedly let out of the wrong hand and was quite unable to count trumps and often forgot what they were. Amy Griffith's play can be summed up in her own words. I like a good game of bridge with no nonsense, and I don't play with any of these rubbishy conventions. I say what I mean, and no post-mortems. After all, it's only a game. It will be seen, therefore, that their host had not too easy a task. Play proceeded fairly harmoniously, however, with occasional forgetfulness on the part of Colonel Appleton as he stared across at Joanna. Tea was laid in the dining room round a big table. As we were finishing, two hot and excited little boys rushed in and were introduced. Mrs. Symington beaming with maternal pride, as was their father. Then, just as we were finishing, a shadow darkened my space, and I turned my head to see Megan standing in the French window. "Oh," said her mother, "here's Megan." Her voice held a faintly surprised note, as though she had forgotten that Megan existed. The girl came in and shook hands awkwardly and without any grace. "I'm afraid I forgot about your tea, dear," said Mrs. Symington. "Miss Holland and the boys took theirs out with them, so there's no nursery tea today. I forgot you weren't with them." Megan nodded. "That's all right. I'll go to the kitchen." She slouched out of the room. She was untidily dressed as usual, and there were potatoes in both heels. "What?" Mrs. Symington said with a little apologetic laugh. "My poor Megan. She's just at that awkward age, you know. Girls are always shy and awkward when they've just left school before they're properly grown up." I saw Joanna's fair head jerk backwards in what I knew to be a warlike gesture. "But Megan's 20, isn't she?" she said. "Oh, yes, she is. But of course she's very young for her age." "Quite a child still. It's so nice, I think, when girls don't grow up too quickly." She laughed again. "I expect all mothers..." All mothers want their children to remain babies. "I can't think why," said Joanna. "After all, it would be a bit awkward if one had a child who remained mentally 6 while his body grew up." "Oh, you mustn't take things so literally, Miss Burton," said Mrs. Symington. It occurred to me at that moment that I did not much care for Mrs. Symington. That anemic, slighted, faded prettiness concealed, I thought, a selfish and grasping nature. She said, and I disliked her a little more still, "My poor Megan, she's rather a difficult child, I'm afraid. I've been trying to find something for her to do. I believe there are several things one can learn by correspondence. Designing and dressmaking, or she might try and learn shorthand and typing." The red glint was still in Joanna's eyes. She said as she sat down again at the bridge table, "I suppose she'll be going to parties and all that sort of thing. Or are you going to give a dance for her?" "A dance?" Mrs. Symington seemed surprised and amused. "A dance? And then it says, Mrs. Symington seemed surprised and amused. "Oh, no, we don't do things like that down here." "I see. Just tennis parties and things like that." I'm going to have to stop, y'all. I'm so sorry. This is so broken up. Love y'all. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. See you around the YouTube streets. Bye-bye.